Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the only one standing between tragedy and tomorrow. The dinner service at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants flowed with effortless elegance as crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors, and the city skyline shimmered beyond the towering glass windows. Business leaders laughed over expensive wine. Soft piano music floated through the room, and every table seemed carefully choreographed for another perfect evening. At the center of the dining room, Ethan Carter, a 42-year-old billionaire chief executive officer, sat beside the woman who had quietly shaped every success he had ever achieved. His mother, Margaret Carter, smiled warmly as she admired the view stretching across the Hudson River. Unlike her famous son, she greeted every server with genuine kindness and never failed to ask for their name. When a young waitress approached carrying 2 elegant dinner plates, Margaret looked up with a gentle smile. "Thank you, Maya," she said after reading the name on the black badge attached to the bright red apron. Maya Johnson smiled back. "It is my pleasure, ma'am. I hope you enjoy your evening." She moved with calm confidence, balancing trays, greeting guests, and anticipating every request with the quiet professionalism that came from years of hard work. Most customers noticed only her uniform. Few noticed how carefully she observed everything around her. Ethan barely glanced up from an important business message appearing on his phone before returning to a discussion about an upcoming healthcare acquisition worth billions of dollars. His schedule rarely allowed him evenings with his mother anymore, yet tonight she had insisted he slowed down for just a few hours. "The company can wait," she had told him earlier. "Family cannot." Ethan smiled politely, though his attention remained divided between the conversation and tomorrow's responsibilities. Maya returned with fresh water just as Margaret suddenly paused in the middle of a sentence. Her smile faded. One hand slowly reached toward the edge of the table while her breathing became noticeably strained. Ethan immediately looked up, confusion replacing distraction. "Mom," he asked softly. Margaret tried to answer, but could not finish her words. Nearby conversations gradually quieted as several guests noticed something was wrong. A few employees froze, unsure how to respond. Maya did not hesitate for even a second. She gently placed the water pitcher aside, calmly knelt beside Margaret, and spoke with a reassuring voice that immediately slowed the growing panic around the table. "Ma'am, stay with me. Help is already coming." She instructed another employee to contact emergency medical services while asking a nearby manager to bring the restaurant's emergency medical kit. Her steady tone gave everyone around her something they desperately needed: confidence. Ethan stepped aside exactly as Maya requested, trusting her instincts despite never having met her before. Within moments, the dining room transformed from confusion into coordinated action because one waitress refused to surrender to fear. Several guests watched in stunned silence as Maya continued speaking calmly to Margaret, encouraging her to remain responsive until trained medical professionals arrived. The paramedics entered only minutes later and quickly took over, praising the restaurant staff for acting so quickly before carefully assisting Margaret onto a stretcher. As they prepared to leave, one paramedic quietly nodded toward Maya. Her quick response made a real difference tonight. Ethan looked toward the young waitress for the first time with genuine attention, intending to thank her properly. Before he could say a single word, the restaurant manager hurried across the dining room with visible frustration. Several guests had recorded the incident on their phones, and whispers spread rapidly through the restaurant. The manager's expression hardened as he turned toward Maya. "Come with me," he said firmly. "Now." Maya removed her apron slowly, glanced once toward the ambulance disappearing into the Manhattan night, and followed without arguing, unaware that the simple act of choosing compassion over fear was about to cost her the only job she had. Before we continue, if you enjoy unforgettable stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary moments, subscribe to Hidden Tables. Every story reminds us that true character is revealed through courage, compassion, and the choices we make when no one is watching. Now, let's see what happens next. The manager did not wait until the restaurant had emptied before leading Maya Johnson into the narrow office overlooking the kitchen. The sounds of clinking dishes and quiet conversations continued outside as though nothing extraordinary had happened, but inside the small room the atmosphere had already changed. Richard Coleman, the restaurant manager, closed the door, folded his arms, and looked at Maya with disappointment that seemed strangely disconnected from everything she had just done. "Do you understand how much attention that scene attracted?" he asked. Maya remained calm. A guest needed immediate help. Richard sighed heavily. Several customers recorded the entire situation. Videos are already spreading online. Reporters may start calling tomorrow. This restaurant has spent decades building an image of flawless luxury, not emergency situations. Maya blinked in disbelief. "I did exactly what any employee should have done." Richard walked toward the window overlooking the dining room, where servers continued greeting guests with practiced smiles. "That is not the point. We cannot control how people interpret what happened. Investors, celebrities, and business executives expect perfection when they walk through our doors." Maya lowered her eyes for only a brief moment before meeting his gaze again. Perfection should never matter more than a person's life. The words lingered in the silence between them. Richard looked away first. "I appreciate your intentions, but I have already made my decision." He reached into a folder resting on his desk and removed an envelope. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated." Maya accepted the envelope without raising her voice. She did not argue. She did not beg. She simply nodded once. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said quietly. Richard appeared almost surprised by her response, perhaps expecting anger or tears. Instead, Maya carefully untied her bright red apron, folded it neatly across her arm, removed her black name tag, and placed both items on the desk with the same care she had shown every guest she had ever served. She gathered the few personal belongings from her locker, smiled politely at co-workers who watched with confused expressions, and walked through the front entrance into the cool Manhattan night, carrying nothing except a small backpack and the envelope containing her final paycheck. Across the city, inside a private hospital, Margaret Carter rested comfortably after doctors confirmed that she had recovered well and would remain overnight for observation. Ethan Carter finally allowed himself to breathe. One physician explained that the rapid assistance she received before emergency medical services arrived had significantly improved the situation by keeping everyone calm and ensuring valuable minutes were not wasted. Ethan immediately thought about the young waitress. "Do you know her name?" he asked. Margaret smiled faintly despite her exhaustion. "Maya. Please thank her for me. She was wonderful." Ethan promised he would. Early the next morning, he instructed his executive assistant to contact the restaurant and arrange a generous personal gift along with a handwritten letter of gratitude. The call lasted less than 2 minutes before the assistant returned looking uncomfortable. "Sir," she said carefully, "they informed me that Miss Johnson no longer works there." Ethan looked up from his desk. "No longer works there?" "They said her employment ended last night." Ethan frowned. "After everything she did, that is all they would tell me." For several long seconds, Ethan stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office as morning sunlight spread across Manhattan. Something about the explanation felt incomplete. Meanwhile, Maya boarded a crowded subway train heading toward a small apartment in Queens. Around her, commuters hurried toward another ordinary workday, while she quietly folded the termination letter back into its envelope. She did not regret a single decision from the previous evening. If faced with the same moment again, she knew she would make the same choice without hesitation. What she did not know was that somewhere across the city, the son of the woman she had saved had just begun asking questions that would eventually uncover far more than either of them could possibly imagine. Margaret Carter insisted on leaving the hospital with one request repeated more often than any doctor's instructions. "Please find the young woman who helped me," she told her son as they drove home through the quiet streets of Manhattan. "Some people change your life without expecting anything in return. Those are the people you never forget." Ethan Carter nodded, but the demands of leading one of the nation's fastest-growing healthcare companies quickly reclaimed his attention. By the time he reached Walker Healthcare headquarters the following morning, his calendar was already overflowing with board meetings, investor calls, acquisition reviews, and preparations for a multi-billion-dollar expansion that executives believed would redefine the company's future. Even so, the image of the calm waitress standing beside his frightened mother refused to disappear from his thoughts. During a break between meetings, Ethan called his executive assistant into the office. "I want every detail about what happened at that restaurant," he said. "Find out why Maya Johnson was dismissed after helping my mother." The assistant contacted the restaurant again, but received only carefully prepared answers. The management insisted the personnel decision had been an internal matter unrelated to the medical emergency. No additional explanation was offered. Ethan considered pushing further, but another urgent meeting pulled him away before he could continue. Meanwhile, Maya Johnson sat inside a modest apartment in Queens, reviewing online job listings while a notebook filled with careful calculations rested beside her laptop. Bills were spread neatly across the small kitchen table. Rent, utilities, groceries, and student loan statements demanded attention with quiet persistence. She calculated every dollar before closing the notebook without complaint. That afternoon, she attended an evening class at a nearby community college, slipping into the back row with a backpack that carried more textbooks than personal belongings. Most of her classmates assumed she had always worked in restaurants. None of them knew she had once dreamed of becoming a biomedical engineer before family responsibilities forced her to postpone those plans. She never spoke about what she had given up because she believed unfinished dreams were still worth protecting. After class, she remained in the library long after many students had gone home, reading technical journals about medical technology, healthcare systems, and operational efficiency. Knowledge had become the one investment no circumstance could ever take away from her. Across the city, Margaret recovered steadily and often spoke about Maya during family dinners. She never panicked, she told Ethan. She looked around, saw exactly what needed to happen, and helped everyone stay calm. That kind of judgment cannot be taught overnight. Ethan listened carefully. Something about his mother's description stayed with him. It reminded him of the qualities he searched for when hiring senior executives. Calm under pressure, clear thinking, quiet leadership. Yet those qualities had appeared in someone serving dinner instead of presenting quarterly reports. Days turned into weeks. Maya accepted temporary shifts at a neighborhood cafe while continuing her studies every evening, determined not to let one unfair decision define the rest of her future. She greeted every customer with the same warmth she had shown before losing her previous job because character, she believed, should never depend on circumstances. At Walker Healthcare, excitement grew around the company's ambitious acquisition of a rapidly expanding medical technology firm valued at several $1 billion. Analysts praised the opportunity. Financial news celebrated Ethan's bold vision. Investors anticipated record growth. Hidden beneath the optimistic headlines, however, public regulatory documents, manufacturing reports, and supply chain filings quietly revealed patterns that almost everyone overlooked. One evening, while researching a class assignment inside the public library, Maya noticed those patterns begin to connect in ways that made her stop turning the page. She leaned closer to the screen, reread the numbers twice, and slowly realized that the company preparing to reshape the future of healthcare might be building its biggest decision upon an assumption that was dangerously incomplete. Maya Johnson spent the next several evenings returning to the same corner table inside the public library, surrounded by stacks of research papers, regulatory filings, public financial disclosures, and supply chain reports that most people would never read voluntarily. The more carefully she examined the information, the more a troubling pattern emerged. Walker Healthcare's planned acquisition depended heavily on a medical device manufacturer whose publicly available production forecasts assumed uninterrupted access to a specialized electronic component supplied by only one overseas facility. Federal import data, shipping schedules, and manufacturing capacity reports painted a different picture. Delays had already begun appearing months earlier, hidden inside documents few investors bothered to examine. Maya reread every report twice, determined to challenge her own conclusions before trusting them. She knew extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. Hours turned into midnight before she finally leaned back in her chair and quietly closed her notebook. The numbers all pointed toward the same conclusion. If the acquisition proceeded without addressing that supply chain assumption, production targets could fall dramatically behind schedule, forcing expensive delays and placing billions of dollars at unnecessary risk. Maya stared through the library window into the cool Queens evening. She had no obligation to warn anyone. Walker Healthcare had never employed her. Ethan Carter barely knew her name. His company certainly had no reason to listen to a waitress who had recently lost her job. Yet another thought refused to leave her mind. If remaining silent allowed preventable harm to occur, she would regret that decision far longer than she would regret being ignored. The following afternoon, after completing her shift at the neighborhood cafe, Maya returned home, opened her aging laptop, and began writing. Instead of emotional language or dramatic predictions, she prepared a concise professional report supported entirely by publicly available sources. She explained the production dependency, documented the import disruptions, referenced government filings, summarized transportation delays, and suggested several practical alternatives that could reduce operational risk before the acquisition closed. Every paragraph remained respectful, objective, and supported by evidence. When she finished, she reviewed the document repeatedly until every sentence communicated exactly what she intended. She signed only her name and submitted the report through Walker Healthcare's public corporate contact portal, understanding that it might never reach anyone capable of making decisions. After pressing send, she closed the computer and quietly returned to preparing dinner, expecting nothing in return. Across Manhattan, Walker Healthcare's executive floor buzzed with optimism as attorneys, analysts, and consultants finalized documents worth billions of dollars. Ethan Carter chaired meeting after meeting, listening to presentations forecasting record growth and expanded market leadership. Every department reported confidence. Every forecast projected success. No one inside the boardroom questioned the underlying supply chain assumption because every respected consulting firm had reached similar conclusions using conventional market analysis. Late that evening, thousands of incoming messages passed through the company's public communication system. Most contained advertising, sales proposals, or general customer questions. Maya's carefully researched report entered the same electronic queue without attracting immediate attention. An automated system categorized it as a general inquiry before forwarding it into a department responsible for reviewing external correspondence. There it quietly joined hundreds of unread submissions waiting for evaluation. Maya never checked whether anyone responded. She believed she had fulfilled her responsibility the moment she shared truthful information supported by evidence. If no one listened, that choice would belong to them rather than her. Meanwhile, Margaret Carter continued recovering at home and occasionally reminded Ethan about the young waitress who had remained remarkably calm during the frightening evening at the restaurant. Ethan promised once again that he would eventually thank her properly, though business deadlines repeatedly delayed his search. Neither of them realized that while one unanswered act of kindness still lingered in their memories, another quiet act of integrity had just entered the company they trusted most, carrying the potential to change its future long before anyone inside Walker Healthcare recognized the extraordinary value hidden behind an ordinary name. Nearly 3 weeks passed before the first signs of trouble appeared, and they arrived so quietly that almost no one recognized them for what they were. Inside Walker Healthcare headquarters, executives continued celebrating the upcoming acquisition while financial news outlets praised Ethan Carter's bold leadership and ambitious vision for the future of medical technology. Investors applauded. Analysts projected record growth. Shareholders anticipated another successful chapter for one of the nation's most respected healthcare companies. Beneath that confidence, however, small details slowly began refusing to cooperate. A supplier requested an unexpected extension on a delivery schedule. A manufacturing partner quietly adjusted production estimates. An international shipping notice reported additional congestion at a major port. Individually, none of the updates seemed alarming. Together, they formed the exact pattern Maya Johnson had described inside the report that still rested unnoticed among hundreds of external submissions. Ethan chaired another executive meeting as department leaders confidently presented optimistic forecasts. One operations manager briefly mentioned a minor shipment delay, but immediately dismissed it as temporary. Another executive assured everyone that consultants had already accounted for ordinary supply chain fluctuations. The discussion quickly moved on to marketing plans and investor communications. No one questioned whether the assumptions behind the acquisition still reflected reality. Across the city, Maya continued balancing early morning shifts at the neighborhood cafe with evening classes and late-night study sessions. She never expected a reply from Walker Healthcare and rarely thought about the report she had submitted. Her focus remained on building a better future one day at a time. Every paycheck covered necessities. Every free hour became another opportunity to learn. She understood that progress often happened quietly before anyone else noticed it. One rainy evening, while reviewing a case study at the library, she came across another publicly available transportation update. The overseas manufacturing facility supplying the specialized electronic component had announced additional capacity reductions because of equipment maintenance scheduled months earlier. Maya compared the new information with the notes she had already collected and slowly closed her notebook. The situation was becoming more serious exactly as she had feared. She whispered to herself, not with satisfaction, but with concern. I hope someone sees it in time. Back at Walker Healthcare, thousands of incoming communications continued moving through automated systems every day. Most messages were filtered, categorized, and forwarded according to established procedures. Maya's report remained buried inside the review queue until an unexpected staffing shortage forced several analysts to assist departments outside their normal responsibilities. Rebecca Collins, a senior operations analyst known for reading documents others ignored, volunteered to help reduce the growing backlog while waiting for updated financial models from another project. Hour after hour, she sorted through proposals, customer comments, vendor requests, and technical questions with disciplined patience. Near the end of the afternoon, one document immediately caught her attention because it contained detailed citations instead of opinions. Rebecca opened the report and began reading. Her expression gradually shifted from routine concentration to genuine curiosity. Every claim referenced public government filings, shipping records, manufacturing reports, and regulatory disclosures. There was no emotional language, no attempt to impress, only careful reasoning supported by verifiable evidence. She reached the final page and looked again at the submission date. It had arrived weeks earlier, before the first supply chain disruptions became visible inside company reports. Rebecca quietly compared the report with the latest operational updates sitting on her desk. Several concerns matched almost perfectly. She leaned back in her chair, glanced through the glass walls toward the executive offices, and realized she might be holding a document that should never have remained unread. At the bottom of the final page, she noticed the author's name for the first time. Maya Johnson. The name meant nothing to her yet, but instinct told Rebecca that before another executive meeting took place, she needed to discover exactly who this person was and how someone outside the company had managed to see what so many experienced professionals had completely overlooked. Rebecca Collins carried the printed report through the executive floor with the quiet urgency of someone who understood that timing could determine the difference between a manageable problem and a costly crisis. She stopped outside Ethan Carter's office, waited for the current meeting to conclude, and stepped inside as soon as his assistant opened the door. Ethan looked up from a conference call that had just ended and noticed the unusually serious expression on Rebecca's face. "You found something?" he asked. Rebecca placed the report on his desk. "I believe someone outside the company identified a supply chain risk weeks before it appeared in our internal reports." Ethan glanced at the cover page before opening the document. As he continued reading, his confident expression slowly gave way to focused concentration. There were no dramatic claims, no emotional language, and no attempt to criticize the company. Every observation referenced publicly available government filings, transportation records, manufacturing capacity reports, and regulatory disclosures. More importantly, the recommendations were practical. Diversify suppliers. Adjust production forecasts. Delay certain purchasing commitments until additional verification became available. Ethan reached the final page and looked at the submission date. This arrived before the shipping delays became public. Rebecca nodded. Nearly 3 weeks before our operations team started reporting similar concerns. Ethan remained silent for several moments. "Has anyone verified these sources?" "I already did," Rebecca answered. "Every citation is accurate. I also compared the report with the latest updates from our manufacturing partners. The trends are matching faster than anyone expected." Ethan stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. For years, he had trusted data above assumptions. Yet somehow an exceptionally valuable analysis had entered the company and disappeared into an administrative queue simply because it arrived from someone outside the organization. "Who wrote it?" he finally asked. Rebecca looked back at the final page. The author identified herself as Maya Johnson. Ethan repeated the name quietly. It sounded strangely familiar, though he could not immediately place it. Do we know anything about her? Rebecca shook her head. Not yet. There is only an email address and a phone number attached to the submission. I wanted to speak with you before contacting her. Ethan turned back toward his desk. First, notify the operations team to review every recommendation in this report. If the evidence holds, I want contingency plans prepared before tomorrow morning. Second, find Miss Johnson. I want to understand how she reached these conclusions using only public information. Rebecca left immediately, carrying copies of the report toward the operations department. Within hours, engineers, logistics specialists, procurement managers, and financial analysts gathered around conference tables reviewing Maya's findings line by line. To everyone's surprise, the recommendations required no extraordinary assumptions. They simply connected pieces of publicly available information that each department had examined separately but never assembled into one complete picture. Before the end of the day, Walker Healthcare quietly approved several precautionary adjustments, including discussions with alternative suppliers and revised inventory planning. The changes attracted little public attention, but internally they represented an important shift. For the first time since planning the acquisition, executives acknowledged that outside perspectives might reveal risks conventional analysis overlooked. Meanwhile, Maya completed another shift at the neighborhood cafe, unaware that her report had finally reached the people who needed to read it. She spent the evening helping a classmate understand a difficult engineering assignment before returning home on the subway with a borrowed textbook resting on her lap. She measured success differently than most people. If she learned something new each day, she believed the future remained open. Back inside Walker Healthcare, Rebecca began searching publicly available employment records and professional profiles connected to Maya Johnson. She expected to find an experienced consultant, a retired supply chain executive, or perhaps a university researcher. Instead, the first confirmed record she located listed a recent position that made her stop typing altogether. Maya Johnson, restaurant server. Rebecca frowned, looked once more at the sophisticated analysis resting beside her keyboard, and quietly whispered to herself, "That cannot be the whole story." Rebecca Collins refused to accept easy explanations because years of analyzing complex operations had taught her that extraordinary results rarely came from ordinary assumptions. The employment record identified Maya Johnson as a restaurant server, yet the report sitting on Rebecca's desk demonstrated a level of analytical discipline that many experienced consultants never achieved. Instead of dismissing the contradiction, Rebecca became even more curious. She expanded her search using public records, professional networking sites, and academic databases. Within an hour, she uncovered another piece of information that changed everything. Maya had completed nearly 4 years of biomedical engineering before family circumstances interrupted her education. She had never officially abandoned her studies. Instead, she had continued taking evening classes whenever work and finances allowed. Rebecca quietly leaned back in her chair, finally understanding why the report felt different. It had not been written by someone pretending to understand complex systems. It had been written by someone who never stopped learning despite life forcing her onto a different path. Rebecca carried the new information directly to Ethan Carter before the afternoon executive meeting. Ethan listened carefully as she summarized everything she had discovered. "She is not simply a former waitress," Rebecca explained. "She has spent years studying engineering while supporting herself through restaurant work." The report reflects that background. Ethan remained silent for a moment before looking again at Maya's name. Suddenly, another memory surfaced. The hospital, his mother's repeated request. The young waitress who had remained calm while everyone else panicked. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Wait," he said quietly. "What restaurant did she work at?" Rebecca named the upscale Manhattan restaurant where the medical emergency had happened several weeks earlier. Ethan slowly lowered the report onto his desk. The room became completely still. "She is the same woman," he said almost to himself. "The waitress who helped my mother." Rebecca looked surprised. "You know her?" Ethan shook his head. "Not really. I tried to thank her, but by the time my assistant contacted the restaurant, they said she no longer worked there." Rebecca's expression changed from curiosity to disbelief. "She saved your mother's life, lost her job that same night, and then warned this company about a major operational risk without asking for recognition." Neither of them spoke for several seconds because the coincidence felt almost impossible. At that very moment, another operations manager entered Ethan's office carrying the latest supply chain update. Several alternative suppliers had confirmed limited emergency production capacity, allowing Walker Healthcare to begin adjusting procurement before the overseas shortage expanded further. Financial analysts estimated that the early response could prevent significant delays and protect hundreds of millions of dollars in future. Operational costs. Ethan read the report before looking once more at Maya's analysis. Every passing day confirmed more of her original conclusions. Find her, he said firmly. Not through a recruiter. Not through legal. I want a respectful conversation. She deserves to know that someone finally listened. Rebecca nodded. She left immediately and began contacting the neighborhood cafe listed in Maya's recent employment records. The manager politely explained that Maya had just finished her shift and attended evening classes several nights each week. Rebecca thanked him but chose not to interrupt her studies. She believed the first conversation deserved patience rather than urgency. Meanwhile, Maya walked across the quiet community college campus carrying textbooks beneath one arm while discussing an engineering assignment with another student who admired her ability to simplify difficult concepts. She never mentioned Walker Healthcare. She never mentioned the report. She simply enjoyed learning. As she disappeared into the evening library, completely unaware that two separate acts of integrity were finally beginning to intersect, fate quietly prepared the conversation that would transform not only her future, but also the values of one of America's most influential healthcare companies. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories where the most overlooked people reveal the greatest strength, subscribe to Hidden Tables. Here, every story reminds us that courage, integrity, and kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Now, let's see what happened next. Rebecca Collins finally reached Maya Johnson on a quiet Thursday evening, just as Maya stepped out of the community college library with a backpack full of engineering textbooks resting comfortably over one shoulder. Her phone vibrated with an unfamiliar Manhattan number. She almost ignored it, assuming it was another marketing call, but something encouraged her to answer. "This is Maya," she said politely. "Good evening, Miss Johnson. My name is Rebecca Collins. I am a senior operations analyst with Walker Healthcare. I hope I am not interrupting your evening." Maya stopped walking. For a brief moment, she wondered whether the company had somehow discovered a mistake inside the report she had submitted weeks earlier. "Not at all," she replied. "How can I help you?" Rebecca smiled gently, even though Maya could not see her. "Actually, you have already helped us. I wanted to thank you personally for the report you submitted through our public contact portal. We finally reviewed it in detail." Maya looked toward the campus lawn where students crossed beneath the evening lights. "I'm glad someone found it useful." Rebecca hesitated before continuing. "Useful may be an understatement. Several of your recommendations have already influenced important operational decisions." Maya remained silent, almost unable to believe what she was hearing. She had expected the report to disappear forever inside an electronic inbox. Rebecca continued, "Would you be willing to meet with us? Mr. Ethan Carter would appreciate the opportunity to thank you personally and discuss your analysis." Maya lowered her eyes thoughtfully. "I would be happy to explain my research if it helps your team, but I am not looking for recognition." Rebecca answered honestly, "I believe this conversation is about much more than recognition." They agreed to meet the following Monday afternoon at Walker Healthcare headquarters. After the call ended, Maya stood quietly beneath the cool autumn sky for several moments. She felt neither excitement nor fear, only gratitude that careful research supported by evidence had finally reached people willing to listen. Across Manhattan, Ethan Carter reviewed updated operational reports before ending his workday. Alternative supplier agreements had already reduced several immediate risks identified in Maya's analysis. Procurement managers estimated that acting early had protected the company from significant production delays while preserving confidence among major healthcare partners. Ethan understood that the financial value of those decisions was substantial, but another realization weighed even more heavily on his mind. The same young woman who had calmly protected his mother without expecting thanks had quietly protected his company without asking for credit. He found himself wondering how many remarkable people passed through his life unnoticed simply because he had never looked beyond a job title. The following morning, Ethan visited Margaret Carter before heading to the office. As they shared breakfast, he told her everything Rebecca had discovered. Margaret smiled knowingly. "I remember her eyes," she said softly. "Kind people usually reveal themselves long before the world notices how talented they are." Ethan nodded. "I finally have the chance to thank her." Margaret gently placed her hand over his. "Then thank her for both gifts, not just one." Meanwhile, Maya prepared carefully for Monday's meeting. She printed updated research, organized supporting documents, and reviewed recent public supply chain reports to ensure every conclusion remained accurate. She chose the same quiet professionalism she had carried into every workplace, believing preparation showed respect for everyone involved. She never imagined the meeting would change her life. She believed it would simply be a conversation about logistics. Yet inside Walker Healthcare, Rebecca quietly arranged the conference room while Ethan requested copies of the original restaurant incident report from several weeks earlier. The closer Monday approached, the more clearly he realized that this meeting would not only be about a remarkable analysis. It would finally bring together two unfinished stories that had unknowingly been moving toward the same moment ever since one ordinary evening when a young waitress chose compassion over convenience. Monday afternoon arrived beneath a clear Manhattan sky as Maya Johnson stepped through the revolving glass doors of Walker Healthcare headquarters carrying a neatly organized folder instead of expectations. She wore a simple navy blazer over a white blouse, professional slacks, and comfortable shoes, her natural curly hair tied neatly into the same high ponytail she had worn while serving customers only weeks before. The security receptionist greeted her warmly after confirming her appointment, and within minutes Rebecca Collins appeared with a genuine smile that immediately eased the formality of the surroundings. "Thank you for coming," Rebecca said. "Everyone is looking forward to meeting you." Maya nodded politely. "I am grateful for the opportunity." As they walked through bright hallways lined with photographs celebrating medical innovation, Maya quietly admired the engineers, researchers, and healthcare professionals whose work filled the walls. She had once imagined spending her career inside a place like this. Life had simply taken her along a different path. Rebecca led her into a spacious conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline, where Ethan Carter stood beside the long table, studying the original report one final time. When he turned toward the door, recognition appeared immediately on his face. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan remembered the calm young waitress who had knelt beside his frightened mother without hesitation. Maya recognized the son who had remained beside his mother that unforgettable evening. Ethan stepped forward first and extended his hand. "Miss Johnson," he said sincerely, "I have wanted to thank you for weeks." Maya accepted the handshake with a quiet smile. "I am very happy to hear your mother recovered well." Ethan paused before answering. "She speaks about you often." They sat together with Rebecca as the report lay open across the conference table. Instead of beginning with praise, Ethan asked the question that had occupied his thoughts ever since reading Maya's analysis. "How did you identify a risk that experienced consultants missed?" Maya opened her folder and calmly explained her reasoning. She described how publicly available import records, manufacturing capacity reports, regulatory disclosures, and shipping schedules each revealed only a small part of the picture. Individually, none of the documents suggested a major problem, she explained. But together they formed a pattern. I simply connected information that was already available. Rebecca listened with growing admiration. Maya never exaggerated her contribution. She described every conclusion as though anyone willing to study carefully could have reached the same result. Ethan realized that humility had become such a natural part of her character that she almost underestimated her own achievement. The conversation gradually shifted from logistics to Maya's background. Ethan asked gently, "Rebecca mentioned you studied biomedical engineering." Maya smiled softly. "Almost 4 years. My father became seriously ill before I finished my degree. After he passed away, I needed to support my family. Working in restaurants allowed me to keep paying bills while continuing classes whenever I could afford them." Ethan looked down for a moment. "You never stopped learning." Maya shook her head. "Knowledge does not become less valuable simply because life becomes more difficult." The room fell quiet. Ethan finally reached into another folder resting beside him and removed a copy of the restaurant incident report. "There is something else I need to ask," he said carefully. The night you helped my mother, my assistant later discovered you lost your job. Was that because of what happened? Maya hesitated only briefly before answering honestly. The manager believed the situation brought unwanted attention to the restaurant. I understood he was protecting the business as he saw it. I chose not to argue. Ethan stared at the report in disbelief. The woman sitting across from him had quietly accepted losing her livelihood after helping his family, then weeks later had protected his company without ever mentioning either sacrifice. In that single moment, Ethan understood that the greatest debt he carried could never be measured in money alone. The weight of Maya Johnson's quiet confession remained in the conference room long after her words faded into silence. Ethan Carter had negotiated billion-dollar agreements, addressed international investors, and made decisions affecting thousands of employees. Yet few conversations had ever left him feeling as humbled as this one. He looked across the table at the young woman who had accepted personal loss without bitterness and offered professional help without expecting anything in return. "Miss Johnson," he said carefully, "I owe you an apology that should have come much sooner. My family benefited from your kindness, and my company benefited from your intelligence. Yet you received neither gratitude nor fairness in return." Maya offered a gentle smile. "Your gratitude today is more than enough. I never helped anyone because I expected something back." Ethan slowly shook his head. "That may be true, but it does not change what happened." Rebecca Collins quietly observed the exchange, recognizing that the conversation had already become something much larger than a discussion about logistics or supply chains. It had become a lesson about leadership. Ethan reached for another folder and slid it across the table. Inside was a summary prepared by the operations division showing how Maya's recommendations had already strengthened the company's response to emerging supply chain disruptions. Procurement teams had secured additional manufacturing capacity before shortages expanded. Production schedules had been adjusted with minimal interruption. Financial analysts estimated that the early actions would preserve critical deliveries to hospitals and clinics across the country while protecting the company's long-term stability. Ethan looked directly at Maya. "This report did far more than protect our financial position. It helped ensure that medical equipment continues reaching healthcare providers without unnecessary delays. That means patients they will never know may also benefit from the work you did." Maya quietly read the summary before closing the folder. "I am relieved the recommendations were useful," she answered sincerely. "That was always the goal." Ethan smiled faintly. "Most people would begin by asking whether they deserve compensation." Maya replied with complete honesty. "Knowledge becomes valuable only when it helps people. Everything else comes later." Those simple words settled deeply into the room. Ethan realized they reflected exactly the values his company claimed to represent, yet here they were being demonstrated most clearly by someone who had never been part of the organization. After a thoughtful pause, Ethan folded his hands together. "I would like to ask you something," he said. "Would you consider joining Walker Healthcare as a consultant while you complete your degree? I believe our engineering and operations teams could learn a great deal from your perspective." Maya looked genuinely surprised. She had expected a thank you, perhaps a professional reference, but nothing approaching an employment opportunity. "I appreciate your confidence," she answered carefully, "but I have not finished my degree. There are many people with stronger qualifications." Ethan smiled. "Qualifications matter. Character matters more. Skills can continue growing. Integrity cannot be taught in a classroom." Rebecca nodded in agreement. "Your report demonstrated independent thinking, discipline, and evidence-based analysis. Those qualities are difficult to find." Maya remained thoughtful for several moments. "If I accepted, I would want to continue attending evening classes. Completing my education has always been important to me." Ethan answered immediately. "Walker Healthcare encourages continuing education. In fact, I would like the company to support the completion of your degree if you are willing to become part of our team." Maya blinked in quiet disbelief. Before she could respond, there was a gentle knock on the conference room door. Ethan's assistant stepped inside and spoke softly. "Your mother has arrived, Mr. Carter." She asked whether the meeting was still in progress. Ethan smiled warmly before looking back at Maya. "There is someone else who has been waiting much longer than I have for the chance to see you again." Margaret Carter entered the conference room with the calm grace that had always defined her, and the moment her eyes found Maya Johnson, her warm smile erased the formality of the corporate setting. Without hesitation, she walked directly toward the young woman and gently took both of her hands. "I have hoped for this day ever since I left the hospital," Margaret said softly. "Thank you never seemed like enough." Maya smiled with quiet humility. "Seeing you healthy is thanks enough for me." Margaret shook her head. "No, my dear. You gave me something far greater than medical assistance. You reminded my son that true character is often hidden behind ordinary uniforms." Ethan lowered his eyes briefly, knowing his mother was right. Margaret turned toward him with the familiar expression that had guided him since childhood. "You once told me that leadership means recognizing value before everyone else does," she said. "Life has just tested whether you truly believed your own words." Ethan answered honestly. "I failed that test the first time." "Perhaps," Margaret replied gently. "But the important question is what you choose to do now." The room settled into thoughtful silence before Ethan faced Maya once again. "My mother has always believed that gratitude should become action," he said. "I agree." He opened another folder and placed a formal employment proposal in front of Maya. The position offered was not symbolic or temporary. It was a paid role within Walker Healthcare's Strategic Operations and Innovation Division, designed to allow Maya to work alongside engineers and analysts while continuing her education. The proposal also included full tuition assistance for the completion of her biomedical engineering degree and flexible scheduling that respected her evening classes. Maya carefully read each page without rushing. She appreciated that the offer focused on opportunity rather than charity. Nothing in the document suggested pity. Everything reflected professional respect. She looked up and met Ethan's eyes. "May I ask one question?" Ethan nodded. "Of course. If I accept, I want to be evaluated by the same standards as everyone else. I do not want special treatment because of what happened with your mother." Ethan smiled for what felt like the first completely genuine smile he had experienced in weeks. "That is exactly why I hope you will accept. I am offering this position because your work earned it." Rebecca Collins added, "Your report has already become required reading for our operations team. Several analysts have commented on how clearly you connected information from different public sources. That ability is rare." Maya quietly closed the folder and looked out across the Manhattan skyline beyond the conference room windows. She remembered the small apartment where she had spent countless nights studying after long restaurant shifts. She remembered carrying trays through crowded dining rooms while reviewing engineering formulas in her mind. She remembered leaving the restaurant after losing her job without allowing bitterness to replace compassion. Every difficult moment suddenly felt connected, not by luck, but by perseverance. She turned back toward the group with quiet confidence. "I would be honored to join Walker Healthcare," she said. Margaret's eyes filled with joyful relief, while Rebecca smiled broadly. Ethan stood and extended his hand once more, but this time the gesture carried something much deeper than professional courtesy. It represented mutual respect between two people whose lives had unexpectedly changed each other. As they shook hands, Ethan understood that the company had gained far more than a talented analyst. It had gained someone capable of reminding every executive that intelligence means little without humility, and that leadership begins by recognizing the dignity of every person regardless of the uniform they wear. None of them realized that another unfinished chapter still waited beyond the walls of Walker Healthcare, because the restaurant manager who had dismissed Maya so casually was about to learn that some decisions echo much farther than anyone expects. The news spread through Walker Healthcare far more quickly than Maya Johnson expected, not because executives announced her arrival with publicity, but because employees naturally shared the remarkable story of the analytical report that had helped strengthen one of the company's most important strategic decisions. Engineers wanted to meet the new colleague whose recommendations had connected details everyone else overlooked. Analysts admired the discipline behind her research. Even senior managers quietly acknowledged that valuable ideas could come from unexpected places if leaders remained willing to listen. Maya accepted every compliment with the same humility she had shown from the beginning. She insisted that careful teamwork would always accomplish more than individual recognition. And before long, people respected her not only for her intelligence, but also for the quiet confidence that encouraged others to contribute their own ideas. During her first week, Ethan Carter invited Maya to observe a strategy session involving procurement, engineering, and logistics leaders. Instead of asking her to speak immediately, he allowed her to watch how different departments approached the same challenge. Near the end of the meeting, he simply asked, "Miss Johnson, is there anything we may have overlooked?" The room became silent. Maya reviewed the discussion for a moment before calmly suggesting that the company strengthen communication between technical engineers and purchasing specialists so that engineering priorities influence supplier evaluations earlier in the decision-making process. Rather than criticizing existing procedures, she explained how small improvements in collaboration often prevented much larger problems later. Several department heads exchanged thoughtful glances before agreeing the recommendation deserved immediate consideration. Ethan noticed something important. Maya never tried to prove she was the smartest person in the room. She simply wanted the room to become smarter together. A few days later, Ethan asked Maya whether she would accompany him to the Manhattan restaurant where they had first met. She accepted, unaware of his full purpose. The elegant dining room looked almost unchanged, but the atmosphere felt very different to Maya as she entered wearing professional business attire instead of a server's uniform. Several former coworkers recognized her immediately and smiled with genuine happiness. Richard Coleman, the restaurant manager, walked toward the entrance expecting to greet another important corporate guest. His confident expression disappeared the instant he recognized Maya standing beside Ethan Carter. Before Richard could speak, Ethan addressed him calmly and respectfully. "I wanted to thank your staff once again for assisting my mother several weeks ago. More importantly, I wanted to introduce you to one of the newest members of Walker Healthcare's Strategic Operations and Innovation Division." Richard looked from Ethan to Maya in complete disbelief. He struggled to find words as he remembered the evening he had dismissed her without asking questions or acknowledging her courage. Maya noticed the discomfort in his expression but remained composed. She did not seek revenge, embarrassment, or satisfaction. Ethan continued in an even voice. "Miss Johnson's analysis recently helped our company avoid a significant operational problem. Her judgment has already benefited patients, healthcare providers, and our organization." The manager quietly lowered his eyes. "Miss Johnson," he said sincerely, "I made a decision that night without understanding who you were or everything you had done. I treated you unfairly, and I am truly sorry." Several employees paused their work, listening quietly from a respectful distance. Maya answered with the same grace that had defined every difficult moment in her journey. "Thank you for saying that. We all make decisions we wish we could revisit. What matters is whether we learn from them." Richard nodded slowly, visibly relieved by her kindness, yet deeply aware that forgiveness did not erase the lesson. As Ethan and Maya prepared to leave, many members of the restaurant staff applauded softly, not because Maya had returned with wealth or influence, but because they had witnessed something much more meaningful. They had seen dignity remain unchanged regardless of whether it wore a red apron or carried a professional briefcase, and every person in the room understood that true character had never belonged to the uniform in the first place. Months passed, and the quiet decision to recognize one overlooked person continued changing far more lives than anyone had imagined on the day Maya Johnson first walked through the doors of Walker Healthcare. She completed her responsibilities during the day with the same discipline that had defined her research, then attended evening classes with unwavering determination until she finally earned her biomedical engineering degree. When her diploma arrived, Ethan Carter and Margaret Carter attended the ceremony without announcing themselves as honored guests. They simply sat among proud families, applauding as Maya crossed the stage to receive the education she had fought so hard to finish. Margaret wiped away a joyful tear and whispered, "Some victories deserve to be earned slowly." Ethan nodded, knowing no promotion or financial success had ever inspired him quite the way Maya's perseverance had. Inside Walker Healthcare, Maya gradually became known not only for solving difficult operational problems, but also for changing the company's culture. She encouraged experienced executives to invite ideas from interns, technicians, administrative assistants, customer service representatives, and every employee whose voice had previously gone unheard. Her belief was simple. Valuable insight did not belong to titles. It belonged to people willing to observe carefully, think honestly, and care enough to speak. Under Ethan's leadership, the company introduced a new internal initiative called Every Voice Matters, allowing employees across every department to submit practical improvements directly to cross-functional review teams. Ethan openly acknowledged that the program had been inspired by someone whose first contribution had nearly disappeared inside an overlooked inbox. Within a year, dozens of employee recommendations improved efficiency, strengthened patient support, and reduced unnecessary costs, proving that humility could become a competitive advantage when leaders chose to practice it consistently. Maya also established a scholarship fund with Walker Healthcare that helped working students pursuing engineering and healthcare careers while supporting their families. She insisted the program focus on determination rather than perfect academic records because she understood that talent often developed under difficult circumstances invisible to admissions committees or employers. Every year, she personally met scholarship recipients and reminded them that temporary setbacks never defined permanent potential. One afternoon, while walking through the company headquarters, Ethan noticed a newly hired cafeteria employee helping a nervous intern who had accidentally spilled a tray. Instead of criticizing the mistake, the employee calmly reassured the intern and helped clean everything together. Ethan smiled quietly because he realized the lesson Maya had taught continued spreading through ordinary moments no policy manual could ever create. Leadership had become less about authority and more about example. Later that evening, Ethan and Maya stood beside the large windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, where they had once shared their first professional conversation. "Do you ever think about that night at the restaurant?" Ethan asked. Maya smiled gently. "Sometimes. Do you wish any part of it had happened differently?" She considered the question before answering. "Losing my job was painful, but if I had allowed disappointment to become bitterness, I would never have written that report. If I had demanded recognition before helping others, none of this would have happened. Looking back, I would not change the choice to be kind." Ethan looked across the city lights stretching toward the horizon. "You changed this company." Maya shook her head softly. "People change when they decide to listen. I only gave them a reason." As they stood together in comfortable silence, the city continued moving beneath them, filled with millions of people whose stories remained unseen. Somewhere, another server was working a late shift. Somewhere, another student was studying after a long day of work. Somewhere, another quiet act of courage was waiting for someone willing to notice it. Because the greatest transformations rarely begin with power, wealth, or recognition. They begin when one ordinary person chooses integrity over resentment, compassion over pride, and excellence over excuses. In the end, the young waitress never became extraordinary because a billionaire noticed her. The billionaire became a better leader because he finally learned to notice her. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Hidden Table and join a community that believes true character is revealed not by power or status, but by courage, integrity, and kindness. Thank you for watching. And until next time, we'll save you a seat at the Hidden Tables.